Hello everybody, I am Tom and you are watching me play Path of Exile 2. So today they released a kind of announcement to the patch they're going to be releasing soon, which is patch 0.1.1. There was also an interview they gave with Ghazzy and Darth Microtransactions on their podcast, so I'm going to try and summarize both of those as quickly as possible. If you want the full context, I will link below both videos, so the video of the actual announcement from GGG themselves, as well as the interview video. I'm going to summarize these as quickly as possible, so it's going to be a kind of TLDR, and I'm just going to cover the stuff that I found most interesting. So, first things first, this is going to be a relatively quick patch, so things that they can fix very, very quickly and don't require a reset to the economy. First things, we have mapping. Basic things increased, so monster spawns, essences, and strongboxes are all going to be far more common. Monster spawns elaborated a bit by Mark in the actual interview. He said that the value of, like, the floor is raised quite a bit as far as profit from maps, just by default, the map by itself. And also you tend to get more of a differentiation between big maps and small maps. Because you have more monsters spawning, the more room there is for monsters to spawn, the more that will be there. So a bigger map is going to have inherently more monsters, but the downside being it'll take you longer to clear it because it's a bigger map, right? So base maps should be around 30% better as far as profitability, which makes the leagues less impactful by comparison. So the leagues aren't being nerfed, but because the base map is better, it means that you don't have to focus so much on a league. If you get a map, like a travel node with a map that it just has a map and nothing on it, it's less annoying to run because you are getting better value out of it. Next, towers. They've added 4 more varieties of towers, so there's actually 5 different maps for towers now, which is much nicer rather than doing the same one over and over again. And the original layout of the tower, they have changed, so it's got a different tile set now, it's a bit less corridory. Bosses. There was supposed to be 1 in 4, so 1 in 4 maps you were supposed to run into a boss, but in reality it was a lot lower than that, and the reason for that was because there are some maps that cannot spawn a boss. So they've increased the actual boss spawn rate such that it is about a 1 in 4 maps that you're running will have a boss. They've also added a tablet which will add bosses to the surrounding nodes, which is really, really good. I like that one. Strong boxes are going to be better. They're making them spawn quicker. They're fixing some visual clarity stuff. They're lowering the amount of clutter on the ground. They're also increasing the visibility of some of the effects. The Atlas is zoomed out better by default, so that's much nicer. It also has a quicker loading time. Citadels can now be seen in the Fog of War. There's a big light poking out of the Fog of War, so they're much easier to locate now. Delirium has about a 20% increase of simulacrum sprinters. That doesn't seem like enough to me. I feel like there's going to need to be a much higher than 20%. You get hardly any simulacrum splinters ever for Delhi, but anyway. Ritual, the omens are going to appear about 60% more often, so you're going to get a bunch more omens. Expedition changes are going to be coming later. They kind of need to do a bunch of reworks around Expedition, but the one thing they have done now is the actual items in the barter window are now higher rarity by default. You will now get multiple attempts at Pinnacle bosses. So the first time you go into it, you will have 6 attempts to kill the Pinnacle boss. For starters, they're going to be doing this with Arbiter of Ash, and they're going to add the other Pinnacle bosses later, relatively soon, they said in the interview as well. They said, ideally, they'll have all of them done by the actual patch, but they don't think they're going to get it there yet. So Arbiter is definitely going to be done. The other Pinnacle bosses will be added later, but as you get higher in the difficulty of those bosses, you'll have less attempts at them. Next up, we have a lot of low-end uniques got buffed. I'll put them up on screen right now. You can pause to have a look. I don't know if this is all of them, because we don't have the actual patch notes yet, but this is a lot of them. So kind of these low-end uniques that are kind of crap because they don't really do enough have all been buffed. They've changed a bunch of the stuff with the mod weighting. I won't go into that specifically, but essentially it's all buffs. Better stuff on items. The mod weighting is just better. Sockets are now overwritable. Finally. God, that was such a good change. I knew they were going to do it because it's obvious, but it's such a good change. They've also done a big balance pass on all of the enemies, so a bunch of the enemy abilities have all been... Largely, it seems that they're nerfing some outlier enemies that could off-screen you. Seems to be the main focus they were doing here. They've also added an item filter on consoles, and they've talked about a small kind of buff to armor somehow. They didn't really go into it specifically, but they have said that they need to do more with armor and kind of the strength side of the tree in general. But that's probably going to be coming in a later patch that has like a full economy reset with it. Now, moving on to the interview. It's about 2 hours long, so I'll just touch on the points that I found most interesting. As I said, if you want to watch it, it's on Ghazzy's channel. It'll be linked below in the description. First things first, I kind of said it before, but Expedition will be buffed later in early access. To quote, "It definitely needs something else," was a quote from Johnathan, I think. But it just doesn't quite have enough there yet. It feels lackluster compared to the others. One-shotting bosses on the first encounter really seem to annoy them. They're expecting that it will be possible to one-shot bosses eventually, but generally the first time you fight them, they expect the boss fight to take about 1 to 3 minutes. For the first time you encounter them, you know? I'd say, just to add my own kind of thoughts on this, I'd say the big reason for this is how long it takes you to get to the pinnacle bosses in the first place. I feel like I had a very clean run through the T15 maps. Like, I think I failed maybe one map on going T1 through to T15, but I didn't fight a pinnacle boss until, like, I'd done, like, I don't know, 50, 60 T15s. I'd done so many maps before I actually got enough stuff to do the pinnacle boss. So by that time, I was very powerful, and like Zesht, I knocked out in like 30 seconds. It was not hard. And I feel like players that are more efficient than me, by the time they get to one, they're just going to have a build that just nukes everything, you know? But that's just my 2 cents. Anyway, a full economy reset is going to happen a few times during EA. That's expected. It's not going to stop you from playing the characters you want. They're essentially going to do what they normally do. So there's going to be an early access, like, permanent realm, and then they're going to increase another league realm on top of that, which will do a full reset. That's where they're going to do most of their really big nerfs and buffs, though. That's going to be in these economy reset changes. Next, Magic Find should be working as intended. They will look into it to see why people are finding it like so mandatory to like stack so much, and make some changes if they need to, but from their side, the numbers should be fine. As I said, there are some people who just don't like Magic Find as a concept, and those people are never going to like it no matter what you do to it. But there are people complaining that like Magic Find in general, but don't like how mandatory it feels currently, so they're going to look into it and see why that is, etc. Melee, Mace's warrior kind of strength section of the tree feels weak at endgame compared to other classes. So they're going to fix that, but likely coming in the big patch, as I said, they're going to be looking into how they can buff that. Armor, same thing. Again, probably in the big patch, they're going to do some big changes. They have made some minor changes now, apparently, but they didn't really go into what those changes were, so we'll see. I don't know. Charms are currently underwhelming. They added them pretty late into development, so they have some improvements that they can make in the future, but it is acknowledged by them that charms just feel largely pointless. Like, they're kind of... It's not a huge development. It's like not high on their pipeline at the moment because it's not a detriment to players. They want to fix all the things that feel really bad first, and then fix the things that are just a bit underwhelming. But at some point, charms are going to get buffed somehow, or changed, just so that they're more useful. Talking about crafting. Crafting, they're okay with it being very slot machine-y. As Mark said, there's a fine line between deterministic crafting and slot machine crafting, and they're very much on the slot machine side of that, but they want to get as close to that line as possible. But he suspects that just adding more leagues will fix some of this, because the more ways of crafting you add, the less RNG is involved. He's also talked about the fact that essences definitely need a buff, that kind of thing. So there are some problems currently that need to be fixed, but at the same time, I have a quote here from Johnathan specifically where he says, "We need to find a way for people to have more control without making it too easy to get the best shit," which is always the concern, to make sure there is room between the better and, like, the normal, the better, and then the best items. Also, they went into a bit of the economy problem. Ghazzy asked this, and I think it was a pretty succinct question because I've had the same problem, where there's not enough sinks for currency, so you get these... It results in massive inflation. Currently, the price of divines... Like, you want to buy a pair of boots, it's going to cost you a shitload of divines. The reason that is because there's not really anything to use divines on. Like, the only thing I would actually spend a divine on... Astramentus, to get a good roll on Astramentus. But that would involve having an Astramentus, which I don't have. Or the belt that gives your rings from... It comes from King of the Mists, but it adds the increased effect of your rings, right? That one as well is probably something people would be sending divines on. But just generally speaking, there's not enough to spend divines on, which makes this huge inflationary result. Whereas in POE 1, there was a way to spend your divines, right? And that's the other thing is Johnathan said is that in reality, why, if there's nothing to use divines on, why are divines so valuable? I think that's just because people need a $100 bill. You can't trade, if they're trying to do a big trade, you can't do it in Exalteds, because that would just be an entire inventory of Exalts and it still wouldn't be enough. So we essentially needed, like that, the Exalt is a $1 bill, we needed a $100 bill, and that's just what Divines worked as, because it worked like that in PoE 1, I think is the main reason. But the problem with that is because there's no sync for Divines naturally, it's just making this massive inflationary problem. Talking about the Atlas tree, Mark has said that the base Atlas tree is quite boring. He's kind of okay with the way that the League trees on the side are all working. They seem to be fine for him, but the actual base tree is a bit boring. It doesn't have enough stuff in it, which I tend to agree on. It's kind of a bit, I don't know, it's a bit nebulous on the actual effects it has compared to PoE 1. Endgame needs an easier way for newer players to come into it from the campaign. So they need to make like the knowledge and the difficulty curve a bit more exponential, so that you go into it fairly slowly and then it ramps up from there and gets to the same point it is by T15s, you know. Also during the endgame, they want more quests, because complete 10 tier 1 maps is just not very interesting, you know. It's something to do, but it's not like... In PoE 1, as you're going through the mapping system, you kind of have these bosses in the middle and things like that. So Mark was talking about doing something like that, potentially. So you get to around T6 maps, and then there's a boss you've got to beat, and then later there might be an Uber version of that boss or whatever. I think that's definitely a good idea. Reroll Ascendancies. Mark doesn't like it. He can't really articulate why he doesn't like it, and he's not going to die on that hill, so I imagine at some point it's probably just going to be allowed, I'll be honest. But Mark doesn't like the idea of doing it. He likes a permanent choice on your character for something like that. Next we got some minion-specific questions, which I care about because I like minions in this game quite a lot. But minions are changing such that they immediately teleport to you if you go off screen. So currently if you leave and go off screen and leave your minions behind, the minions will die, and then they come back at the respawn timer that the minions have. It's kind of annoying. So now, after you go off screen, they should just teleport to you directly rather than going on the respawn timer. So that's much nicer. They didn't answer the question. Ghazzy did technically ask it twice. He didn't really push it more than that because they weren't answering it, but that's fine, I guess. But they didn't really answer why no Convocation. So Convocation in PoE 1 is a spell where you can cast a spell, and all of your minions will teleport to that location. I feel like that will fix a lot of the problems, because some of the big problems they talked about was minions getting stuck indoors. If you've got like 3 minions, they will just run at the door and can't get through. It's a big problem. And they talked about how they tried just turning off the collision between the minions, but it just felt like crap and it broke everything and just wasn't very good. I think Ghazzy's right, Convocation would kind of fix the problem, because if I can just hit a button and tell my minions to teleport there, it would fix the problem entirely. But they didn't really answer the question why it's not in there, so maybe they have some reason why they don't like it, but they didn't say one way or the other. Next, they talked about Spectres. When Spectres? The answer is soon, TM. They're a lot of work, because it was kind of funny. They talked about, when Mark was talking about skills from players, they put a lot of work in to make sure it's like really, really tight and everything works. Like, this is a projectile, therefore it scales off all these projectile things and stuff like that. But with monsters, they're a bit more haphazard. They don't really care as much because it's not going to directly affect the player. Except, it kind of does because of Spectres. So they're doing a lot of work on Spectres to make them work well. But they should be out soon, which I'm happy for, because I really want to play with Spectres. And there was also asked about the movement speed implicit on boots. Sadly, they're both against it, and they're both perfectly fine of having a mandatory stat on boots, being you need to roll movement speed. I hate this so much, but they seem to be stuck on it. Maybe we can complain enough and get it changed, but I don't know. But that's pretty much everything as far as I can tell for the really important stuff. As I said, TLDR, still like a 15-minute video, but it's 15 minutes down from like 2 hours and 15 minutes, so that's pretty good. Anyway, if you liked the video, please leave a like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and go check out the original videos if you want a bit more context and a bit more overall explanation. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.